Thank you so much, and happy to have everyone here today. Thank you to the audience for attending and listening along. We hope to have you participating as well in this discussion. So today we're going to talk about, we'll start by talking about how we are shaping the future of procurement, or how procurement will be shaping in the future. Some of the factors to consider when you're driving your transformation or transforming your operating models and the drivers for that, as well as looking at different procurement operating models. We'll classify a bit of those, what we see today. And we'll jump into designing new procurement operating models and transformation. And again, we're looking at the core procurement operating model, how we're organized, the need for agility, small a agile versus large a agile, just for anyone thinking this is a DevOps type conversation, that IT agile processes do have some crossover where we can leverage those into the procurement function, but it's not quite the same. We've got other webinars where we dive into what parts cross over and what don't. So let's jump into a poll. I would love to hear from all of you on the session today. How many of you have recently evolved your procurement operating model in the last 6 months, in the last year? No, you haven't, but you are planning to in the near future, or you haven't changed and you don't plan to. You've got what you got, happy or not. There's a lot of movement, and so far, no one who's said not changed. So that tells me this is a timing question. You've either done it recently, or you're looking to do it soon. We'll give another minute just to finish the poll here and see if we can get a response from everyone. Let's see, we're almost there numbers wise. All right, why don't we go ahead and close that? All right, so a third of you said in the last 6 months, a third of you said in the last year, and then a third of you said no, you haven't, but you plan to. It looks like just a handful, a couple people said have not changed and don't plan to. So we'll presume that might be why you're here. It's a good reason to attend this webinar, but certainly interesting data. It's always good to hear where people are before we start out on the storyline and the data that we want to share today.
And this is
Yeah, go ahead.
this is very interesting to see, because we also have been hearing from our clients, right? There are multiple reasons why they are thinking about changing their operating models. One can be they just want to increase the efficiency of their procurement functions, but also there is this lack of alignment with business, which is one of the major concerns which procurement functions have, and that is the reason why they are trying to transform their operating models to best suit their business functions needs.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've all been hearing the same, and as we hear from the business realigning their operating model, and that's happening a lot in IT organizations, as tech is a part of everything, right? So we hear about business operating model changes. How does the sourcing, the procurement organization align with those? So it's a pretty hot topic right now, even though it feels like, org structure, operating model, kind of old school, old news. It's continuously evolving, and if you want to stay on top of things, you need to continuously evolve. So great lead in for my next slide, which is, what is really driving this need to focus on the operating model. And there's a number of different things. One is that the business is changing, and we need to continue to align with business stakeholders. Procurement's goal as a function is not just to save money, although we want to harness the value of our supply base and get the quality we need at the most competitive price. But it is to drive value in the business, and you've got to be aligned with those stakeholders to drive that kind of value. Lack of visibility. So sometimes we don't have visibility into what we need because we're not quite aligned in the right way, or not quite structured in the right way. Resources are overstrained. In fact, anecdotally, a CPO study we did recently, we asked how procurement is being funded, and if it's being funded for transformation consistent with other functions, and I think more than half of the respondents said it's being funded less than other functions. So the more with less is pretty much a universal thing for this function. We never quite have enough resources, and we don't have the same, marketing gets all the money, right? So need to constantly be staying on top of that, and how acting efficiently. Obviously, the market's really volatile. There's been more responsibilities beyond cost savings. I just mentioned that value capture, and value can mean a lot of different things and different things in every category. But there's also needs for things like sustainability and strategic initiatives and supply-based diversity. So bringing all those new responsibilities in often means adjusting the model as well. And then, of course, new technologies. So the way that we work changes as we introduce new technologies, and to capitalize on that, sometimes you need to adjust. So Pratik, let's hear from you a bit about some of the benefits of adjusting.
Thanks, Amy. So as the audience would also likely agree, right? Most of the organizations do recognize the need to transform their procurement operating models. And in fact, we have received a lot of queries also from our clients around this. So while the answer to that question does vary from organization to organization, depending on their internal considerations, but some of the things that remain consistent are the key outcomes or benefits that those organizations are able to achieve through their transformed operating model. And it starts right from the top, looking at the overall procurement strategy and how a good procurement or a right fit procurement model helps you align your procurement goals and objectives to your overall organization strategy that you have. So an example for this can be around some of the sustainability initiatives that an organization would have. So while an organization would have broader goals, procurement also has an important role to play, given its direct relationships with suppliers, which constitute a significant part of the organization's sustainability footprint. Now, similar to that, talking about the overall strategy, procurement also has an important role to play in terms of helping the organization adapt to the changing market conditions, whether it be price volatility or the cost pressures that were the theme in 2023 and continuing even well into 2024 as well. Similarly, procurement does have an important role to play when it comes to educating and informing and even enabling the organization, leveraging some of these new gen technologies that are coming up within procurement operations, and even driving this or helping in sourcing of the technologies in other adjacent business functions as well. Another area where procurement does play an important role through its operating model is helping an organization learn from with the way that it works with different functions across the organization. So procurement can facilitate innovations, best practices as part of its role as enabling an organization to procure the goods and services at a cost-effective price while also looking at the overall stakeholder experience. Now, while Amy, you did say that procurement is not really about or not all about savings, but money still matters, right? Given the current environment. And having a right operating model does help you improve your cost savings. It can help you drive better negotiations with your suppliers. And while resource allocation or resources do remain a challenge for procurement, I think that's something that we have been hearing since quite long and has not really been addressed. But having a right procurement operating model can help you actually allocate your resources more effectively. And that can be enabled through technologies wherein some of the transactional work can be automated and the resources can focus on more strategic work. Another area where we see having the right procurement operating model helps is in terms of your standardization of procurement policies and processes, and bring out economies of scale also through collaboration of different business units. Now, compliance is also another area which procurement does love and does struggle with also, given the globalized nature of operations across most organizations. So having the right fit procurement model helps you bring that transparency and that consistency in terms of incorporating compliance as part of your processes and helps ensure accountability and informed decision-making throughout the entire procurement value chain. And similarly, from a risk management perspective as well, having the right procurement operating model can help you minimize or mitigate the risks that you have from potential suppliers, and even encourage them to adhere to the overall organizational goals and even the regulatory and ethical requirements. So now that we have discussed the benefits of right procurement operating model, Amit, why don't you talk about how does it actually come into reality and across the evolution of the procurement operating model?
Sure, Prateek. Thanks. So yeah, I'll just quickly move to the slide. Okay, yeah. So conventionally, what we have seen procurement functions do is, as and when they mature into more, or into having more important role in the organization, their operating model also evolves along with that. One of the major issues with decentralized operating models is that the buyers are very much scattered across the organization, and they are still having no single leadership which can help them having consistent policies and procedures, right? So, I mean, the classification of operating models is very much easily identified on the basis of how much is the degree of centralization in that particular organization. So I spoke a bit about decentralized operating models, but as the procurement function matures, the operating model should also evolve along with it, right? This is where centralization comes into picture. As and when organizations start to formalize their procurement functions, they start seeing that evolution come into picture, where procurement has those practices which are standardized across the organization. And the result is fascinating, because this particular centralization provides you with increased spend visibility, and also being able to enforce those strategies that are being formed at the central level, in turn enhancing not just your cost savings, as Prateek mentioned, but also improving the alignment between business and procurement function. And this, I mean, this will obviously require a lot of effort from the procurement function itself, which involves them increasing the collaboration with the business function via means of having business partners embedded in the system, which we will speak about in the next section. But yes, these are the few ways in which organizations evolve their procurement functions. And eventually, as the procurement organization matures into a full-fledged strategic role, they start moving towards a more center-led approach. Now that happens in such a manner that there is still autonomy at the central level, where they form those strategies, form those policies and procedures that the organization needs to follow. But at the same time, there is some amount of decentralization where they let go of certain responsibilities, which are essential to be run at a business unit level or at a local level. That way, the organization is able to reap benefits of both the decentralized and centralized models. So on one hand, you get the economies of scale, which can be leveraged via centralization, and also you will be able to preserve that decision-making capabilities of business units via decentralization. So this is the way in which we are seeing organizations moving towards a more center-led approach.
Yeah, that's an interesting continuum, I would say. So while we have discussed the different types of operating models, let's also look at some of the design factors that go into designing your overall operating model. And we'll also talk about some of the operating model characteristics and procurement's business partnering in this section. So now looking at the key design factors which impact or influence the way that organizations go about designing their operating model. So some of these are broader considerations, looking at your overall organizational structure as well as the strategy that you have. So procurement operating models should ideally mirror the way that an organization is structured. If it's a highly decentralized structure that business units have, then the procurement operating model should be aligned to that to meet specific business requirements, regional requirements across different geographies. And similarly, from an overall strategy perspective as well, the way that procurement's operating model should be designed, the goals and objectives should be aligned to the overall organizational strategy that the firm has. And an example of which we discussed was around fostering or enabling sustainability and fostering innovation. So that your procurement model should be structured in a way that it helps you drive these common goals that you would have across the organization. None, while these were some of the broader organizational factors, or other factors which determine your operating model would be your overall supplier market. So your operating model should be designed in a way that enables you to collaborate and communicate with your suppliers effectively. So in a decentralized model or in a central-led model, you can have procurement teams or procurement staff based out of regions where your suppliers are located, while still continuing to have a centralized team at a global level. Similarly, from a categories perspective, we have typically seen that some of the more strategic categories, those are ideally placed closer to the business, as they require close working with the business units, and even in terms of the risks that they possess, it's crucial to have them close to the business. Similarly, we see less strategic categories can still be managed effectively in a centralized manner at a global level. Another factor that influences the operating model is the availability of resources that you would have. So it is crucial for your operating model to be designed in such a way that you are able to access the required talent and expertise aligned to the different business units or even the different categories that you would have. So your procurement operating model should take into consideration where your resources are located and how they report to the overall global teams that you would have. So while these were the design factors, now let's look at some of the underlying characteristics also, which would ultimately determine the right fit operating model for your particular organization. Now, this would entail in terms of the reporting lines that you would have. So starts right from your CPO, whether it reports to the chief operating officer or the CEO, depending on the strategic importance that procurement has within the organization in its ability to meet the overall business needs. In terms of procurement staff, there also we do see an approach wherein you would have some of your procurement staff reporting to local business units, depending on specific requirements. And then you can have your staff even reporting to the overall global procurement team, depending on the operating model that is best fit for your organization. Similarly, from overall procurement strategy formation and looking at the overall geographic structure as well, this would be dependent on the amount of control that you would need, that your procurement team would need in terms of influencing the overall objectives that you would have, or in terms of fulfilling the demands of your individual business units. So we do see that being influenced even in terms from a geography alignment perspective as well. So typically you would find staff supporting local units being closer, especially for some of these strategic categories or for categories that require regional nuances or understanding of the regional context. Similarly, from a category management perspective, we do see like in the centralized operating model, having global category managers and a global category management process is more effective when you're looking at designing your procurement operating model. And while if we contrast it to decentralized models, there we see either the spend is not really managed effectively, or you don't really have a category management process for it, or if it is there, it is entirely managed at a local or a regional business unit level. And from a procurement influence perspective, we do see the centralized or center-led procurement teams having much more influence on the overall spend, while in decentralized structure, we do see limited to no influence when it comes to the way that an organization is managing its spend.
Yeah.
So while these, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Pratik, I was just going to comment. I think that category management point is really important. And what I usually, when I'm talking to leaders, part of what to think about there is not just, how you do category management, but when and where you do category management. So not every category you spend money on needs a full category manager, and the structure around that and the strategic look at the market and the interaction with stakeholders. There are some categories that, it's fine to set it and forget it from an automated purchasing model, right? Enable requisitioners to buy off an approved supplier list, and there's not a lot of volatility in the market, and they have low business impact. But I think the driver there, when you look at your spend profile, is which are the categories where we do have significant business impact in a volatile market or a changing market, evolution, high stakeholder needs, et cetera, where you need to really build in that category management capability. And some of those might be at a regional or a local level, but still fit really well into a center-led model, where you're deciding, you're having those trade-off decisions between global category management and local or regional, but still are kind of following the same playbook. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about in these models, and probably why we'll talk a bit about different options, but that center-led model tends to be the one that more mature organizations sort of settle into.
That's an interesting point, Amy. And in fact, I would say recently, just aligned to this theme, we have actually received a lot of inquiries from organizations looking to streamline their tail spend management, right? So they are still not while you would I would say assume that given the need for procurement's transformation as well as its evolving role, tail spend is something that organizations would have already figured out. But there also we do see them seeking support in terms of understanding how they can better manage it, or whether they actually need to manage it. So I think that's a very important point that you highlighted. Now, moving back in terms of the overall operating models and looking at the underlying tenets as well as the characteristics, there's not really I mean, theoretically, why you can say that an operating model should be aligned in a particular way, but during implementation, we see that there is some overlap when it comes to different operating models. And if we look at the three predominant operating models that you would have, and looking at the underlying design tenets also, you would see the differentiation coming out primarily on the decentralized and centralized model. And in center-led, you would find more of a hybrid approach, wherein you would have some tenets from the centralized model as well as some tenets from the decentralized model. So typically, if you look at some of the characteristics from a CPU reporting perspective, in a decentralized model, you would typically find him or her reporting to a CEO, while in centralized and center-led models, we do see a CPU directly reporting to the CEOs. From a staff reporting line perspective, in a decentralized model, we typically see the staff aligned to local or regional business units, while in a centralized model, we see it aligned to the global procurement team that you would have. From a category management perspective, while in centralized, you would find it to be globally managed. In a decentralized, it's managed as regional or a business unit level, while in a center-led, you follow a hybrid approach depending on the specific category requirements that you would have. Similarly, from a procurement influence perspective, we see procurement having a low influence when it comes in a decentralized model, while in the centralized and center-led model, we see procurement to have much more of influence when it comes to spend. Now, moving on, I think Amit has an interesting question coming up for the audience again.
Yeah, thanks, Pratik. While these options are majorly around if your organization has a centralized, decentralized, or a center-led operating model, we do know that it is very difficult to put them in particular constructs. But we would like for you to answer if what is your operating model resembling the best? Is it centralized, near to being decentralized? That way, we would have better visibility into how do you go about structuring your operating models. And I see the responses are flowing in, and a lot of the responses are towards centralized and center-led operating models, as we were expecting, right? Because the maturity, as we mentioned, is very much associated with the operating model as well. And the organizations which are mid-level mature or are moving towards becoming more mature in their procurement functions are adopting centralization as a feature in their operating models. And this is clearly visible from the results as well. which is very interesting to know, because with a lot of organizations now thinking about Gen AI and new age technologies to be implemented in their procurement technology stack, it is very much important to first focus on the policies and procedures as well, because technology at the end of the day is just an enabler, right? You need to first have a robust framework in place, which can be enhanced with the help of this technology. Like, for instance, procurement orchestration is the talk of the town right now. A lot of procurement conferences mention about procurement orchestration and how it is the next big thing out there, but it will only be beneficial if uh, your organization has all the policies and procedures figured out, and you are seeing that the strategies which are formulated centrally are being properly implemented at the ground level. This will only happen once you have that structured operating model in place. Great. Now that we have these responses, I'll quickly move to the next slide, and we will now deep dive into each of the operating models that we spoke about. But as Pratik also mentioned, it is a continuum, and there is no fixed structure in which you can explain how your operating model looks like. That is also the reason why we saw a few responses for the previous poll being on the hybrid side. They don't associate themselves with having a center-led operating model or a centralized operating model for that. Okay, great. So talking a bit about decentralized operating models to start off with, while we do see that a lot of responses in the previous poll were not towards decentralized, but still there are a few organizations who are starting out with their procurement functions. Their buyers are still scattered across the business units, or they are in the process of formalizing their procurement functions. Now, the problem with this is that as a result of most of them don't have a head of procurement or CPOs. So sometimes a senior buyer comes into picture as a liaison and to act between the business and the C-suite to enhance that collaboration. But still, it is very difficult to do that, right? As you can see in a typical example that we have shared in here, organizations might have a CPO, but that is just mentioned in there so that there is no confusion on who would be acting as a liaison. Then if category management has been established, which is very rare in case of decentralized operating models, but as they start moving towards a more centralized approach, they start also forming category management teams. That's why we have included that in there. And you can see that the buyers are majorly reporting into those business units. As we spoke before, there is a loss of standardization, and organizations are not able to implement consistent procurement policies and procedures across the board. Also, if the category management structure is present, then in such a setup, it is managed more at a business unit level, where the buyers are reporting into them, and they also indirectly report into the senior procurement professional, who is reporting into the chief operating officer, as most of the activities which the purchasing organization is doing currently are on the operational level and not on the strategic level. Hence, it makes more sense for them to report into the CEO. Then we also talking about the business unit teams. Then they are more responsible to form the strategy associated with purchasing in such an operating model. And that is precisely the reason why there is lack of coherence in the strategy that is formed across the organization when it comes to purchasing. And this siloed approach would have still been manageable if the organization was not complex. But that is not the case, right? As procurement is starting to get more and more responsibilities apart from cost savings, like let's say organization goals achievement is one of the major responsibility that procurement functions have started taking care of now, whether it be sustainability or scope 3 emissions, or you talk about innovation, supplier diversity. These kind of things are leading to more complex setups, and hence it is not the case now that the siloed approach like this can help with optimum functioning of a procurement organization. Then we will quickly move into the centralized piece of it. But before we do that, there is one particular reason why centralized operating models also it's something from which more mature procurement organizations are moving away from. While centralization is great, I mean, you are able to formalize your procurement function, but at the same time, the it comes with a major problem, which is the procurement function and business are not in sync. There is not a lot of collaboration happening in centralized operating models when it comes to the procurement function and the business unit. This misalignment often leads to the strategy which is formed at a central level getting lost. I mean, it is not reaching to the ground level, and hence you don't see those kind of results which procurement function expects from centralizing the function. In these cases, business partners are the ones who can solve this problem. What we are seeing is best-in-class organizations doing is that they're embedding business partners at the business unit level. This often leads to a more aligned way of operating with the internal stakeholders. What these business partners are doing is they engage and influence the stakeholders in such a manner that organizations are able to influence the innovation, enable it, and at the same time also ensure that procurement strategy is strictly adhered to. And they are also helping out the organizations in mitigating any sort of supplier risks that come into picture. One other role which business partners are interestingly taking on is that they promote procurement's agenda. And also they are sharing insights from their part of business with the global procurement team. Now, this sort of visibility is very crucial for the procurement function, because then they can pick and choose those ways of working and then replicate that across other business units. In that way, the learning curve is very steep, but at the same time, they are able to ensure a lot of more value being created from the procurement function. While the main purpose of these business partners still remains to improve relationships with internal stakeholders, but they should also ensure that there is no communication breakdown between business and procurement. That is precisely why the most sought after skills for such a role are that they should possess procurement domain knowledge, but at the same time, they should also have cross-functional skills. It is imperative for them to have good communication skills and at the same time being able to resolve any sort of conflicts that might arise between the business function and the procurement team, because that often happens. Everyone knows that there is certain way in which a business unit wants to do things and there is certain way in which procurement wants to do things. But then bringing both of these stakeholders on one platform and helping them work towards the organization goal is something which business partners are being seen doing in a lot of best-in-class procurement functions. I do know that Amy has one particular example.
Yeah, we were chatting about
that she wants to share. Yeah.
Yeah, we were chatting about an example earlier. I'm not going to name names, but there is one very large tech company that, obviously in tech, needs to be very innovative. And in the past, I think they actually reorged again, but recently, again, have to stay agile and keep reorging, right? Keep changing and adapting. But in the past had, hundreds of people in procurement. And I think about 300 or 400 of them were out in the business, embedded into different product lines, working with those product groups to understand the needs of the business, to understand their roadmap, get ahead of their budgeting cycle, to know what's coming down the pipe, and also bring the power of the procurement organization to those stakeholders. They had about probably 40 or 50 sourcing execution people who are actually running RFPs and doing there's obviously also a transactional team for the purchase to pay process, but the actual sourcing for most deals was done with a central team that was kind of mechanically running that. But the real, bulk of the team was out in the business, probably the people in those business units didn't necessarily even recognize them as being a sourcing person or procurement person. They were just part of that business team, but they did report back in directly to the center-led organization. And I always think of that example because it's such a high investment into being, into business partnering. And when you look at the results, this is a company that's grown pretty quickly, and captured value and grown in a pretty lean way. So I think there's a lot we can learn from that, even if we can't go quite as far to that direction.
Yeah.
Their new model, by the way, didn't kill that version. It's just there's some other tweaks to it that using new technology, better embedding new technology like Gen AI across the business, requires a slightly different teams and things like that. So.
Got it. Yeah, that's very insightful, Amy. Because what business partners also help with is they provide procurement and early entry into the sourcing stages. Like if the business function is thinking about sourcing something, then what happens most of the time is they have finalized everything and then they just involve procurement at the negotiation stage, which is not at all fruitful. There is no sort of value that procurement can create at that stage. I mean, they can, but it would be very beneficial if they're included at an early stage. And that is what business partners can do in a centralized operating model as
well. Yeah, definitely.
While, yes, so in this particular slide, you can see a typical example of a centralized operating model where you see the business partners are directly reporting into the global category management team and they are assigned to particular business units. While having said that, I do know that procurement has been always plagued with the problem of overstrained resources, and it is very difficult to assign individual business partners to every business unit. So what we are seeing organizations are doing is that in cases of important business units where they see that there is some sort of issue in communication, there are a lot of communication breakdowns happening, the strategies are not being properly implemented in those business units. That is where procurement is currently involving business partners. They are the ones who collaborate between the category management team and the business unit. And at the same time, the buyers also interact with these business partners to ensure that everything is going as planned by the central category management team. This again is something which is very much important to know, because as we saw from the poll as well, there are a lot of organizations who have participated in this webinar who currently have a centralized operating model. And what do you need to do to move towards a center-led approach is something they should know very much. And well, talking about centralized operating models first is that the demand for centralized operating models is that the majority of spend should be subjected to category management. Until and unless that is the case, a centralized operating model does not make sense. Because centralizing procurement will provide your procurement team with the opportunity to simplify things for your internal stakeholders. This will happen by them acting as a central resource and at the same time tailoring the procurement processes or technology, or let's say the category strategies as well, to align more with the needs that the business unit has. For example, if we are talking about the IT function, and what we are seeing recently is IT function is wanting to align more with business, and procurement is playing a critical role in that. So these procurement operating models need to be aligned with the IT operating model in order to enable that kind of optimum efficiency. At the same time, centralized operating models can also help with sustained cost savings, and they can always enable long-term goals such as sustainability, innovation, and strategic supply management as well. One thing that is noticeable about these models is that you can see that there is no category manager present at the business unit levels. So the implementation of category strategy is very difficult in such cases. Business partners are the ones who are in charge to do that in these cases. And what we are seeing best-in-class organizations with centralized operating models do is that these business partners work closely with stakeholder relationships on the stakeholder relationships, and the category managers uh, possess a lot of deep knowledge about the market conditions, the supplier base, and the business partners and category managers bring this together to formulate a foolproof strategy for business, which is very much aligned with the market conditions and also what the business needs. This is how organizations with centralized operating models can enhance their ways of working. Now, moving towards the center-led operating model, here you can see a typical setup where the category managers ensure that the centrally formed strategy is properly implemented at the business unit level. And also there are a few buyers who are allocated specifically to the business units, while there are others who transversally work on the ad hoc basis. This provides a lot of flexibility, right? When we speak about having an agile operating model, center-led operating models offer this flexibility. The reason being, as I mentioned before, they are the best of decentralized and centralized operating models, right? They bring the best out of these models as they help with leveraging the benefits of standardization, which are provided by centralization, and also ensure that there is no loss of control at the business unit levels, which a lot of times is the reason behind conflicts happening between the business unit and the procurement function. This is how a center-led operating model can be beneficial. One difference which we can point out between the decentralization in a center-led operating model and a decentralized operating model is that in this particular instance, the category managers directly report into the category management teams and not into the business units, the way decentralized operating models are structured. This, again, as I mentioned, is very much important to implement the centrally formed category strategies, right? Now, Amy before spoke about which categories should be centralized, which categories should be decentralized, right? Now, the decision of that will majorly depend on what kind of category it is. So let's say there are broad categories like marketing or logistics. These categories don't require that amount of customization in purchasing. So it is easier for them to be led globally, where you just have a particular set of category strategies created for them and you implement them across the board. So it is easier for broad categories like them. But when it comes to categories like hardware or software, which are core for organizations, these categories require procurement to work very closely with the business units. Hence, it is better if these kind of categories are managed at the business unit level itself. This is what we mean by a center-led operating model. You customize it according to your organization's needs or preferences or goals. No, we are not just talking about categories, but also about allocating the buyers to those business units, or even in this case, you can have business partners. Let's say you are having category managers for certain business units, which are very much important for you. Then you can prefer to have business partners as well, who can take the load which category managers have regarding maintaining stakeholder relationships and enable them to focus on more strategic activities, which can bring more value to the table. And one other thing which I would like to mention before handing it over to Amy is that, these categories which are being decentralized, they will end up having some low influence by the global category management team. But at the same time, it will help you to enhance the relationship between business and procurement, which is very much important, because that will lead to a highly responsive procurement function. And that is the whole reason why we are speaking about efficiency so much and having an agile operating model. This is how you get to a very much responsive and agile operating model. Having said that, I'll quickly move to the next slide and we'll hand it over to Amy.
Sure, thank you. And just want to pause for a second and interrupt to share an offer. This is specifically for buyers of services. So if you're a service provider, not for you, you won't necessarily need this data. You probably already know it. But if you are a buyer of services, we offer a price check. Want to encourage those that we haven't worked with in the past, especially, and if you're a member of our advisory programs, our outsourcing excellence membership, you actually probably already have this in your price book. But certainly for those less familiar with Everest Group, this is an opportunity to get a little more familiar with how we cover outsourced services markets. So related to procurement operating models, not directly, but if you're a category manager, this should be useful. There's a link that that admin just shared in the chat. On that, you can select 2 roles from any of these 3 functions, and you can select 2 countries. These are the 4 most commonly outsourced 2 countries, among many others. I heard today from our locations team, we cover 310 different locations now. So top 4 is just the tip of the iceberg, but please request that. We'll get back to you with some description and price definitions, I should say, and pricing benchmarks to share a little bit more about how we view the services market. Everest Group, again, focused on global services and all of the support and market intelligence you need for your procurement organization. So wanted to give people an opportunity to understand what we offer here and how we work. And with that, let me turn it over to Pratik. I think you're going to take the lead on this next poll.
Yeah, so this is an extension to our previous question, and it was encouraging to see that many of you are already going through procurement or operating model organization redesign. So what we want to understand from you or get your perspective on is what are some of the major hindrances that you have faced when it comes to designing your procurement operating model. Okay, looks like we have the responses coming in. Just give a few more time.
We see a lot of responses coming on the lack of resources, right, Pratik?
Yeah.
which is the recurring question from our clients as well.
Definitely. And I would have expected even change management. I think, yeah, it's also quite close to that. So I just had it's a joke that I frequently have with the clients also. So every time if I get a question or query regarding change management, and if I get a penny for that, so I will not still finish, but I think it can help me fund a nice vacation. Yeah. Looking at the overall responses, it's not really surprising to see the lack of resources, which I think has been procurement's challenge all throughout. And even looking at change management, because any organization redesign or the operating model redesign does require significant change management efforts, and many of the organizations are still continue to struggle with. And the change management is not really for your internal procurement organization, but changing the way or managing the change in terms of the way that you serve your business stakeholders. I think that is also another area where we see a lot of organizations continue to struggle. Okay. So now looking at some of the top challenges that you'd see, and it's not really surprising to see it's the ones similarly that we had as part of the poll options. So some of the top challenges that we see organizations continue to struggle with include change management, which is both internally in terms of how do you manage change in terms of your overall procurement teams, in terms of your staff alignment, in terms of allocation of responsibilities, resources, and how would that transition or change as you incorporate or move to a different operating model. So this continues to be a top challenge, and I'll park this for now because Amy does have a few insights to share in terms of how organizations can go about effectively managing change within their operating model. Another aspect which is similar to the lack of resources is like even if procurement does dedicate resources to this transforming its operating model, we do see a lot of feedback or struggles around them being able to do their core primary job, which is helping the organization effectively procure the goods and services that it would require for its business operations. So that is an area where we actually see conflicting priorities and responsibilities coming into play, wherein on one hand, you're leading the way in terms of transforming your operating model, while on the other hand, you're still expected to deliver on your day-to-day activities and tasks that you would have. Another challenge which features quite prominently in some of the clients, which actually require huge investments and costs, whether it be from a staffing or a resource realignment perspective, or even as they look to leverage some of the next-gen technologies or solutions that are coming up into the market. So this is also another area where we see procurement does struggle with when it comes to redesigning their operating model. And procurement being procurement, they're always very wary in terms of how they're going to spend their money. And similarly, the business expectations also from procurement are along the similar lines. So from a change management or from a transformation perspective, having a defined business case for change and educating the stakeholders with regards to the outcomes and the benefits, and even looking at the timeline for change is very important when you go about designing your procurement operating model. And it need not really be a big bang transformation. I think the timing of the change and the investments required also needs to be looked at so that an organization can move into their operating model in an efficient manner without negatively impacting the day-to-day responsibilities and the outcomes that they drive for their business stakeholders. So with that, Amy, do you all want to talk about what are, say, some of the typical areas or venues which organizations can take into consideration when it comes to change management?
Yes, thank you, Pratik. Great points on that last slide. I think there's a lot to think about there. Want to touch just briefly before we move into some of these good questions that we're getting. Want to touch on change management because any kind of change in a large organization can be challenging. And some of the things that we recommend when we work with leaders are, first of all, doing an impact assessment, understand who is most impacted, stakeholder analysis, tools like that can help you to really think about who is going to be, who is a supporter and who is impacted, and how do you use those supporters or those highly engaged people to your advantage to help to smooth out that change and identify potential disruptions and dependencies and risks. You definitely need to train procurement. Helping people understand their roles and how to best interact and how to work most effectively is key to getting any value from change. And make sure that leadership is bought on, right? So it's one thing to have the procurement leadership bought on into this. You need to have the other peers, their leaders, their peer leaders as well. And then, of course, continuous monitoring and optimizing. So we make a lot of decisions every day as leaders, and just because we make one decision doesn't mean you can't go and adjust it and reevaluate for how it works in the real world. So the best organizations, I think, are constantly evolving. And with that, I know we have just a few minutes left. I want to jump into some of the questions. Before I do that, a little public service announcement. Everest Group is having our inaugural event called Everest Group Engage in just a couple weeks in Dallas, Texas, September 30th to October 2nd. I hope that many of you on this call can join us there. Pretty excited about this. We'll have a whole track of content as well as some main stage events for those that are managing third parties, so sourcing teams, vendor management teams, global business services leaders, and many other leaders in the organization as well. Excited about the networking as well as getting all of our analysts together in person to do what we often have to do virtually. So if you're interested in that, if you're a sourcing person or someone in a large enterprise and you haven't gotten information on this, reach out to me. The website's here, but happy to get you an invite as well to make sure that we're that they're included. We're filling up really quickly, but I personally, as one of the research thread chairs for this, cannot wait to get there and see all the magic happen. So with that, I want to jump to the Q&A, and there are a couple of questions that have come in, some of them which have a lot in common. Yes, the slides and recording are always shared. Those will be available. And definitely want to answer one about where does the CPO report, because I know we didn't cover that today, and we get that question a lot. I'll share anecdotally that, well, it's not really anecdotal. I have a lot of data on this from past studies, but we often see the CPO reporting into either a CFO on the finance side, often if it's an indirect or a services company, or a COO or a chief supply chain officer if it's a product manufacturing company. There are some instances where the CPO reports to the CEO, but it's much less prevalent. I'll throw out off the top of my head, that's like a 10% thing. And then I'd say the rest are sort of split. Depending on the corporate operating model, there's some other opportunities or some other alternatives to that. I don't have a strong recommendation on one being right or better than the other. I think that the priorities of the business kind of dictate that. I also think that there's a lot of internal passions and political power that can sometimes dictate what's going to get you the most, most of your needs met in terms of budget and strategy, and the ear of the CEO. So, take that into consideration, but that could be argued in either direction, I think. Let me take one other question. Business partnering, KPIs of business partners, and do they execute deals as category managers? So I think the category manager role to me is really about being embedded with your stakeholders and the longer term planning of the category strategy, which is not necessarily the same as a sourcing execution role. So in a model like the business partnering, the category managers are there. It's more like partner managers instead of looking across the category. The sourcing is still executed by a central team. However, I think those partner managers are closely involved in that. So part of the idea of that is that those business partners aren't doing a lot of, their time is not consumed by sourcing events, but also in a really strategic organization where you have category managers, partner managers, the majority of their effort and the value is not coming from sourcing events. Usually they're beyond just, supplier consolidation and negotiation for the lowest price, right? There's a lot of levers that they can pull that deliver more value for the stakeholders. So that's not necessarily an either or question. And I think there's a lot of, it varies, the answer, even in that one example I gave, varies a little bit by the roles and the stakeholders and the business units and everything. Are we talking about a very small spend that's local to that business unit, or a broad enterprise? We're negotiating our Oracle license or something. You're going to have, a different stance on that. I know we're just about out of time, and I think that hit on about half of the questions we have. So I think we need to wrap up, unfortunately. If you did have other questions that you want to send us, the questions our emails are right here. You can also respond to the general Everest Group website email, and that'll get routed to us. But want to thank everybody for joining today. Thank you, Pratik and Amit. You both have brought a lot of great insights to the discussion. And everyone, have a great morning, evening, afternoon.